Found out my parents left everything to my brother in their will, so I stopped helping with their bills. A month later, Mom texted me, "The mortgage is due." No greeting, no small talk. I simply replied, "I'm sure Carter will handle it, since the house is his." Less than an hour later, the receptionist at my apartment building called. My parents and my brother had bypassed security and were storming through the lobby doors, demanding to see me. Before I tell you how this absolute nightmare ended, and trust me, the look on their faces when reality finally hit them was something I will never forget. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Thank you for being here. Grab a warm cup of coffee, sit back, and let me tell you the whole story. I stepped out of the elevator and my boots hit the cold marble floor of the lobby. The air conditioning was always cranked up too high in my building, but suddenly I was sweating. My jaw was locked so tight my teeth actually ached. And there they were. My mother, Margaret, stood dead center in the lobby. She had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, wearing her expensive cashmere sweater, the one I had bought her for her birthday last year. She was tapping her designer shoe against the floor, a rhythmic, impatient sound that echoed off the high glass walls. My father, Robert, stood right next to her. He had his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His face flushed a deep, angry red. He looked like a pressure cooker about to blow. And standing slightly behind them, slouching and staring down at his glowing smartphone screen as if none of this involved him, was Carter, my 28-year-old brother, the golden boy who had never held a real job a day in his entire life. My mother spotted me first. Her eyes locked onto mine and she did not hesitate. She marched forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the stone. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not say she missed me. She did not apologize for ambushing me at my own home on a Tuesday evening. She stopped 2 feet away from me, pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest, and demanded to know why the $3,500 mortgage payment had not cleared her bank account that morning. I stood there and just looked at the woman who had raised me. Then I looked at the father who stood silently backing her up, offering zero defense for his eldest son. Finally, I looked at the brother who was smirking behind his phone screen, fully expecting me to cave just like I always did. My pulse pounded in my ears. It was a steady, deafening drumbeat of pure, unadulterated rage. I took one step forward, closing the distance between my mother and me. I lowered my voice so the concierge and the 2 neighbors waiting for a package across the lobby could not hear the exact words, but I kept my tone sharp enough to cut glass. I told her that my days of funding their comfortable suburban lifestyle were permanently over. I told them to turn around and leave my building right this second before I had the front desk call security to drag them out by the collars of their expensive coats. My father stepped up then. He puffed out his chest, trying to use the same physical intimidation tactics that used to work on me when I was a scared teenager. He leaned in, his breath smelling of stale coffee, and told me I was acting like a spoiled, ungrateful child. He told me that family takes care of each other no matter what. I laughed. Couldn't help it. It was a cold, hollow sound that scraped the back of my throat. It was so completely devoid of humor that even Carter looked up from his screen, his smirk faltering for a split second. I didn't say another word to them. I turned around, walked straight back to the elevator, and hit the button for my floor. As the heavy stainless steel doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of my mother's furious, shouting face, a strange, heavy sense of calm washed over my entire body. I did not know exactly what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for absolute certain. The Bank of Elijah was officially closed for business. But to understand how we ended up screaming at each other in a luxury apartment lobby, I need to take you back 5 years. I need to tell you exactly how I became the designated human ATM for the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. For the past 5 years, my life followed a very specific, incredibly exhausting routine. I would wake up at 5 a.m. every single morning before the sun even thought about rising. I would grab a stale granola bar from my pantry, throw on my overcoat, and take the crowded, freezing subway to my corporate finance job in the city. I worked 50 to 60 hours a week minimum. I was the guy who stayed late on Fridays to finish the quarterly reports. I was the guy who answered emails at midnight. I busted my back to climb the corporate ladder, and eventually, I earned a six-figure salary. On paper, I was doing fantastic. I was a 32-year-old man with a solid career trajectory and a great title. But in reality, my bank account was perpetually gasping for air. Despite that high salary, I lived in a tiny, depressing one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The radiator in my living room clanked loudly all night long, and the window in my bedroom had a draft that let the bitter winter wind seep right through the glass. I drove a 10-year-old sedan with a massive dent in the passenger side door that I could never afford to fix. I rarely ate out at restaurants, I never took vacations, and my professional wardrobe consisted of exactly 3 decent suits that I rotated endlessly, dropping them off at the cheap dry cleaners down the street. Where did all my money go? It went straight to my parents' sprawling, 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. Every single month, on the first of the month, like absolute clockwork, I logged into my banking portal and transferred $3,500 to cover their mortgage. I never missed a payment, but it didn't stop there. Then came the frantic phone calls about the property taxes being reassessed. Then the sudden, catastrophic emergencies. The water heater flooding the basement, the roof leaking after a spring storm, the transmission on my father's SUV completely failing. I paid for all of it, every single dime. I did it because that is what you are taught to do. You take care of your parents. You honor their sacrifices. You step up when they need you. I remember sitting in the office break room one gloomy Tuesday afternoon, staring blankly at a massive spreadsheet on my laptop screen while eating a sad, homemade turkey sandwich. My coworker, Sarah, walked in and sat down across from me. Sarah was a senior analyst like me. She was sharp, highly perceptive, and possessed absolutely zero filter. She watched me rub my exhausted, bloodshot eyes and let out a heavy sigh. She asked me point-blank why I looked like I had aged 10 years in the last 6 months alone. I gave her the usual, rehearsed excuse. I told her work was stressful and I wasn't sleeping well. Sarah leaned over the table, tapped her polished fingernail against my laptop screen, and told me to stop lying to her face. She knew I was sending the vast majority of my paycheck home to my parents. I had slipped up and mentioned the roof repair cost to her a few weeks prior. She looked me straight in the eye and told me that I was setting myself on fire just to keep my family warm. I immediately got defensive. I defended my parents, of course. I told Sarah that they were getting older, that the economy was tough on retirees, and that they desperately needed my help to keep their home. Sarah just shook her head slowly. She picked up her coffee mug, stood up, and started walking toward the door. Just before she left, she tossed one last comment over her shoulder. She said, "Elijah, there is a very big difference between helping someone climb out of a ditch and letting them build a luxury house on your back." I brushed her off. I convinced myself she just did not understand my family dynamic. I convinced myself that my parents truly appreciated my sacrifices. I convinced myself that my relentless hard work was securing my permanent, respected place in the family. I could not have been more blind if I tried. While I was drowning in a sea of corporate spreadsheets, financial anxiety, and sleepless nights, my younger brother Carter was living in a completely different reality. Carter was 28 years old, a grown man by any standard definition, but he lived in the fully furnished, temperature-controlled basement of my parents' house. He paid absolutely zero rent. He bought his own groceries maybe twice a year, and usually only when he wanted a specific brand of energy drink my mother forgot to buy. He spent his days streaming video games online to an audience of maybe 12 people, and his nights hanging out with his friends, going to bars, and sleeping in until noon the next day. Whenever I drove out to visit my parents on the weekends, the driveway always had a brand new delivery box sitting on the front porch. High-end, curved gaming monitors. Limited edition designer sneakers that cost more than my car payment. Custom mechanical keyboards and performance parts for a vehicle he rarely even bothered to drive. I used to sit at the kitchen table and ask my parents, directly, how Carter was affording these luxury items without a paying job. My mother would always put on this deeply concerned, wounded expression. She would sigh heavily, place a delicate hand over her chest, and tell me that Carter was still finding himself. She would aggressively argue that the job market was absolutely brutal for his specific degree, a completely useless degree in communications that took him 6 long years to finish. A degree funded entirely by the college fund my parents had completely drained, leaving absolutely nothing for my own education. I had to take out massive student loans to get through university, loans I was still paying off while Carter got a free ride. My father would always chime in right on cue. He would walk over, pat my shoulder heavily, and tell me that I was the strong one. I was the independent, resilient son. Carter, he claimed, just needed a little more time and a little more support to get on his feet. It made me angry, a deep, simmering anger that lived in the pit of my stomach. But I swallowed it. I buried it deep down because causing a massive scene felt like a betrayal of the family unit. I thought keeping the peace was my duty. But the cracks in my patience were starting to show, wide and undeniable. One Saturday afternoon, I drove out to the suburbs to help my dad clean out the gutters before the autumn storms hit. I was 20 feet up on a rickety aluminum ladder, covered in wet, rotting leaves and black grime, freezing in the wind. Meanwhile, Carter sat comfortably on the heated patio, scrolling through his phone and drinking an iced coffee. Suddenly, I watched Jason, a guy I used to be friends with in high school, pull his flashy sports car up into the driveway. Jason was a smooth talker, a guy who was always looking for a quick, shady hustle. He walked straight up to Carter. They did a complicated, familiar handshake. Then, Carter pulled a thick white envelope out of his pocket and handed it over. In exchange, Jason handed Carter a small, black velvet box. I knew exactly what it was the second he opened it. It was a thick, custom gold chain Carter had been bragging about wanting on his social media for weeks. I gripped the rungs of the ladder until my knuckles turned completely white. My mother had literally called me crying on the phone just 3 days earlier, claiming they did not have enough money in their checking account to cover the soaring winter electric bill. I had transferred $500 immediately, eating ramen noodles for the rest of the week to compensate. And here was Carter, buying expensive gold jewelry in broad daylight, right in front of my face. I confronted my parents about it later that evening in the living room. I demanded to know where the money came from. My mother actually had the nerve to defend him. Her voice cracked as she said Carter needed a confidence boost for his upcoming job interviews. Job interviews that, I knew for a fact, never actually materialized. The absolute injustice of it all sat heavy in my chest, a physical, suffocating weight that I carried around every single day from that moment on. The absolute breaking point, the moment that shattered my entire worldview, happened purely by accident. It was a miserable, rainy Saturday afternoon in late October. I had driven over to my parents' house, sacrificing my only day off, to help my dad figure out his new scanner. He had purchased a complicated all-in-one printer and could not understand how to connect it to his laptop's wireless network. I sat at the heavy oak desk in his home office, clicking through endless settings panels and downloading outdated drivers from the internet. My dad was standing by the large bay window, complaining loudly about the terrible weather and talking over my shoulder about some golf tournament playing on the small television in the corner. Once I finally got the machine working, he pointed to a massive stack of manila folders sitting precariously on the edge of the desk. He asked me to scan them into a digital archive on his hard drive. He casually mentioned they were just old homeowners' insurance policies, vehicle registrations, and ancient tax documents he wanted backed up before he shredded the physical copies. I didn't think twice about it. I grabbed the first folder. I opened it, placed the crinkled papers face down on the scanner glass, and hit the green button. I did this mechanically for about 20 minutes, zoning out to the sound of the rain hitting the glass. Then, my hand brushed against a thick, cream-colored envelope buried right in the middle of the pile. It wasn't in a folder. The paper felt heavy and expensive. The return address printed neatly in the top left corner caught my eye immediately. It was from a highly prestigious law firm located downtown in the city. The name printed at the top was Benjamin, a well-known, high-end estate planning lawyer. I knew for a fact my parents could never afford his hourly retainer without dipping directly into the emergency funds I sent them every month. Curiosity, dark and insistent, got the better of me. The envelope flap was tucked in, but it was unsealed. I carefully pulled out the crisp, heavy parchment paper tucked inside. At the top of the first page, in bold, formal, unforgiving black lettering, it read, "Last Will and Testament of Robert and Margaret." I froze. I told myself I should immediately put it back. I told myself it was highly confidential and none of my business. But the voice in the back of my head, the voice that sounded exactly like my coworker Sarah, screamed at me to read it. I justified my snooping by reminding myself that I had personally paid the massive mortgage on this house for 5 long years. I had paid the property taxes. I had paid for the roof over their heads. I had earned the absolute right to know how things were being handled for the future. I scanned the first few pages, my eyes glazing over the dense legal jargon and standard clauses. And then, I hit the section titled, Distribution of Assets. I read the first paragraph once. My vision actually blurred. I blinked hard, shaking my head, and read it again. My breath caught sharply in my throat. The words printed on the page were painfully, devastatingly clear. Upon their passing, the house, the remaining savings accounts, the life insurance payouts, and all physical assets were to be left entirely 100% to Carter. The word inheritance was bolded, and right next to it was my younger brother's name. I did not get a percentage. I did not get a token amount. I did not get a single solitary penny. I kept reading, frantically searching the document for my name. I flipped to the next page, my hands shaking so violently the heavy paper rattled in the quiet room. Finally, I found it. A single, brief, entirely dismissive sentence buried near the very bottom of the third page. It stated, in cold legal terms, that because their eldest son, Elijah, was financially independent, gainfully employed, and successful in his career, they were confident I did not require any portion of the inheritance. I sat completely frozen in the leather desk chair. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the scanner finishing its cycle, and the rain lashing against the window pane. A cold, heavy knot formed deep in my stomach, spreading ice through my veins. I want to be perfectly clear. It was not about the money itself. I did not want my parents to pass away anytime soon, and I was making a good salary on my own. I could survive without their money. But this legal document sitting in my trembling hands was a profound, undeniable statement of my actual worth to them. I was the workhorse. I was the reliable safety net. Carter was the beloved, cherished son who deserved the kingdom handed to him on a silver platter. They were actively taking my hard-earned money every month to secure the equity in this house, only to plan on handing the keys directly to my lazy brother the second they were gone. My dad finally turned away from the window, noticing the prolonged silence in the room. He walked over, a casual, easy smile on his face, holding his coffee mug. He asked if the scanning was almost done so we could grab lunch. Then he stopped dead in his tracks. He saw exactly what I was holding. The color completely drained from his face in less than a second. He took a staggering step back, his eyes darting wildly toward the closed office door. I stood up slowly, pushing the chair back so hard it slammed into the bookshelf behind me. I held the will up in the air, my grip crinkling the expensive paper. My voice did not shake. It was terrifyingly calm, a low register I didn't even recognize as my own. I looked straight at him and asked if this was some kind of sick joke. I asked him if he and Mom had really sat down in a leather chair across from a high-priced lawyer, paid for with my money, and officially decided that my years of financial support and sacrifice meant absolutely nothing. My dad stammered. He rubbed the back of his neck furiously, looking at the floor, the ceiling, everywhere but at my face. He muttered that it was complicated. He mumbled a pathetic excuse, saying they had to protect Carter because he was vulnerable and didn't have the same drive I did. My mother walked into the office at that exact, terrible moment. She was carrying a tray of fresh iced tea and a plate of cookies. She stepped through the door, saw the document clutched in my hand, and gasped loudly. The tray rattled violently in her grip. She quickly set it down on a side table and immediately rushed forward, putting on her soft, pleading, victimized voice. She reached out with both hands, trying to touch my arm. "Elijah, honey, please understand. You don't need the inheritance," she said gently, looking at me with wide, teary eyes. "You have a great job. You are so smart and capable. Carter struggles so much. The world is hard for him. We just want to make sure he is safe and taken care of when we are gone." I pulled my arm away from her touch like her skin was made of burning acid. I looked at both of them standing there. I saw the flash of guilt in their eyes, yes, but beneath that, I saw the stubborn, unyielding justification. They genuinely believed they were completely in the right. They genuinely believed it was my unspoken duty to fund my brother's future existence. I carefully, deliberately set the will back down on the center of the oak desk. I looked my mother dead in the eyes and said, "I understand perfectly. I am so glad we finally cleared up exactly where I stand in this family." I didn't wait for a response. I walked right past them, ignoring my mother calling my name. I walked out the front door, got into my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The next 2 weeks following that confrontation in the home office were absolutely agonizing. I drove back to my apartment and immediately locked the door. I did not call my parents. I did not send a text. I completely cut off all forms of communication. My small apartment suddenly felt larger, emptier, and quieter than it ever had before. The silence was deafening. Every evening after work, I would sit on my worn-out couch, staring at the peeling paint on the ceiling, replaying that entire confrontation over and over again in my mind. Every single time I closed my eyes, I saw the black ink of those signatures on that will. The betrayal wasn't just an emotional concept. It felt like a physical, sharp ache radiating through my ribs. I kept my phone right next to me. I kept waiting for it to ring. A small, pathetic part of me, the inner child that still desperately wanted a loving, functional family, actually thought they would call and apologize. I thought they would reflect on what happened, realize how deeply and terribly they had hurt me, and try to make it right. I wanted to hear my dad say he was sorry. I wanted my mom to admit they had taken advantage of me. But the phone stayed completely silent. They were playing a calculated waiting game. Knowing my parents, they were absolutely convinced that my walking out was just a temporary temper tantrum. They thought I would cool off, sit alone in my apartment, start to feel horribly guilty about upsetting them, and eventually reach out to check in. More importantly, they thought I would log into my banking app on the first of the month and set up the automated mortgage transfer just like I always did out of sheer habit and obligation. They were relying heavily on my decades of conditioning. They had trained me for 32 years to seek their approval at all costs, and they were betting their literal house that my psychological training would hold strong. At work, my focus was completely shattered. I couldn't concentrate on the financial models in front of me. I made careless, uncharacteristic mistakes on my weekly reports. Sarah, my coworker, noticed the shift in my behavior immediately. One Thursday morning, after I completely botched a simple projection in a team meeting, she marched over to my desk, grabbed my arm, and physically dragged me into an empty, glass-walled conference room. She shut the door firmly, pulled the blinds closed, and demanded to know exactly what was going on. I sat down in the swivel chair and finally broke down. The dam burst. I told her everything. I told her about finding the will on the desk, about the lawyer, about Carter getting everything, and about my parents' pathetic, unapologetic excuses. Sarah did not offer empty, comforting platitudes. She did not pat my hand and tell me that family is everything and blood is thicker than water. She leaned across the heavy mahogany table, looked me square in the eye, and told me the harsh truth. She said I was suffering from severe withdrawal. She told me I was deeply addicted to being the dependable, good son, and going cold turkey from that toxic dynamic was going to hurt like hell. She warned me, her voice deadly serious, that when the first of the month rolled around and my parents checked their bank account and realized they did not get their money, the silent treatment would end instantly, and the real, ugly war would finally begin. I took a deep, shaky breath, nodded my head, and braced my mind for the incoming storm. Sarah's prediction was terrifyingly accurate. On the morning of the second day of the month, I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on a spreadsheet, when my phone vibrated violently against the wood. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was a text message from my dad. My heart instantly started pounding a little faster against my ribs. I unlocked the phone, genuinely expecting maybe a tentative, awkward greeting, maybe a soft excuse to open a dialogue. Instead, I opened the message, and the words practically punched me in the face. The text read, "The property taxes are due today. The bank sent an alert that the mortgage transfer didn't go through. Fix it immediately." I sat there and read those 3 short sentences 3 times over. There was no, "Hello, Elijah. How have you been?" There was no, "We miss you." There was absolutely zero apology for what happened in the office. It was a cold, incredibly demanding, purely transactional message. It was an order from an arrogant employer to a low-level subordinate. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of that text burned away whatever lingering, pathetic guilt I had been secretly harboring over the last 2 weeks. They truly, deeply believed I was nothing more than an open wallet they had permanent access to. I picked up the phone. My fingers didn't shake this time. I did not draft a long, emotional, multi-paragraph text explaining my deep feelings of betrayal. I did not try to argue logic with them. I simply typed one single sentence. "I'm sure Carter will handle it, since the house is his." I hit the send icon, locked the screen, and dropped the phone back onto my desk. Exactly 5 minutes later, my phone lit up again. My mother was calling. I sat entirely still and watched her name flash on the screen until the call finally rolled over to voicemail. A second later, a rapid-fire text from her came through. "Elijah, please don't be like this. We need to talk right now." I read it and ignored it. 10 minutes after that, Carter finally chimed in. His text popped up on my screen, dripping with the kind of smug entitlement only a favored child could possess. "Dude, why are you being such a massive drama queen? It's not a big deal. Just help mom and dad out like you always do. Stop stressing everyone out." I gripped the edge of my desk so hard my fingers cramped. A drama queen. My unemployed, lazy brother was calling me a drama queen for refusing to pay thousands of dollars for a house I had just been legally, permanently cut out of inheriting. I picked up the phone and typed back rapidly, letting my anger guide my thumbs. "No, I think you've got it fully covered. You're the favorite son. You're the sole heir. You pay their bills." Carter didn't miss a beat. He immediately replied, "Oh my God, are you seriously still mad about that stupid will? Grow up, man. It's just money. Just money." The absolute hypocrisy was staggering. When it was my money, it was expected. When it was his future money, it suddenly didn't matter. I fired back my final response. "If it's just money, then you won't mind using your own cash to pay the mortgage today. Good luck with the bank." I put my phone completely on silent, flipped it face down on the desk, and turned back to my computer monitor. The bridge wasn't just burned. I had completely blown it up. By the end of that first week of the month, the panic in my parents' camp had clearly escalated from irritation to full-blown desperation. They had checked their accounts. They had called the bank. They finally realized I was not bluffing and the money was truly gone. The bills were piling up fast, and they had zero financial safety net because they had spent years relying entirely on me. That is exactly when they decided to deploy their secret emotional weapon. My phone rang early on a Saturday morning as I was making coffee. The caller ID flashed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Aunt Clara. Clara was my mother's older sister. In our family dynamic, she had always played the specific role of the sweet, endlessly understanding peacemaker. Whenever there was a loud dispute at Thanksgiving or a family argument, Aunt Clara would swoop in with a tray of freshly baked goods and soft, comforting words to smooth things over. She always smelled like expensive vanilla and hidden agendas. I took a breath and answered the phone. "Hi, Aunt Clara." "Elijah, my sweet boy," she said immediately. Her voice was trembling slightly, thick with what sounded like genuine, tearful emotion. "I am so incredibly worried about your parents. Your poor mother called me crying her eyes out yesterday. She says you won't even speak to them. Elijah, honey, family is all we truly have in this dark world. You cannot abandon your own flesh and blood over a piece of paper. I closed my eyes, pinched the bridge of my nose, and rubbed my temples. Aunt Clara, please understand. It is not just a piece of paper. It is a legally binding document that represents a lifetime of disrespect and exploitation. She sighed heavily, a dramatic, breathy sound. I know, honey. Believe me, I know it hurts your feelings. But they are getting old. People make mistakes when they are scared. You are the bigger person here, Elijah. You always have been. Please, I am begging you, just send them the money for this 1 month so they don't lose the roof over their heads. Will you do that for me? I actually hesitated. I stood in my kitchen holding my coffee mug and felt the deep, ingrained guilt programming kicking in. She sounded so reasonable, so kind. But before I could answer and cave to her demands, my call waiting beeped loudly in my ear. I pulled the phone away and saw it was Uncle Dave, Clara's husband. I quickly told Clara to hold on for 1 second and switched the lines over. Elijah, Uncle Dave said immediately. His voice was a low, rushed, urgent whisper, like he was hiding in a closet. Listen to me very carefully. I know Clara is on the other line with you right now. Do not give your parents a single dime. Not one. I was stunned. Uncle Dave? What are you talking about? What is going on? Your parents called us yesterday and begged us for a massive loan. Dave explained rapidly, his voice tight with anger. Clara flatly refused. She absolutely doesn't want to part with a penny of our retirement money. But she told your mother not to panic. Clara promised she would call you this morning, play the sweet aunt, and guilt-trip you into paying the mortgage so we wouldn't have to deal with them asking us again. She completely agrees that they treat you like garbage, Elijah. She just doesn't want them knocking on our front door asking for cash. My stomach dropped to the floor. The betrayal was multi-layered and sickening. Even the so-called family peacemaker was just manipulating my emotions to protect her own wallet. I thanked Uncle Dave quietly, switched the line back over to Clara, and interrupted her fake crying. I told her in a dead, flat, icy voice that if she cared so much about family, she should write my parents a check from her own checkbook. Then, without waiting for her shocked response, I hung up the phone and permanently blocked her number. That incredible sequence of manipulations brings us right back to the chaotic lobby of my apartment building. My parents and Carter, increasingly desperate, out of options, and absolutely furious that Aunt Clara had failed to reel me back in, had physically tracked me down. After I delivered my final warning to them, turned my back, and walked away into the elevator, I genuinely thought the confrontation was over. I thought they would take the hint and leave. I was wrong. Just as the heavy steel doors were sliding shut, my father rushed forward. He shoved his thick hand between the closing doors. The rubber safety bumper hit his wrist, forcing the heavy metal doors to violently retract and slide open again. He stepped aggressively into the confined space of the elevator car with me, his face red and mere inches from mine. You are not walking away from us, he hissed. His breathing was heavy, and the enclosed space suddenly smelled of stale coffee, expensive cologne, and pure, frantic panic. I stood my ground, refusing to shrink back. I planted my boots firmly on the floor, pressing my back against the mirrored wall of the elevator. Step out of the car, Dad. Right now. I am not playing games. My mother immediately pushed her way in right beside him. Tears were streaming freely down her carefully made-up face, ruining her expensive mascara. Elijah, we are going to lose the house. Do you hear me? The bank sent a final notice this morning. You are really going to stand there and let your own parents become homeless on the street. I looked past their shoulders. I saw Carter. He was lingering safely outside the elevator doors in the lobby, cowardly refusing to engage in the fight, just watching us like it was a television show. The sight of him standing there made my blood boil over. I am not letting you become homeless, I said loudly, projecting my voice so it bounced off the lobby walls, making absolutely sure Carter heard every single word. Carter is letting you become homeless. Tell your precious golden boy to go down the street and get a job at a fast food restaurant. Tell him to sell his $5,000 gaming computer setup. Tell him to go to a pawn shop and sell the custom gold chain he bought from Jason last month while you were literally begging me on the phone for electric bill money. My mother gasped loudly, stepping back as if I had physically struck her across the face. My father's expression instantly morphed from aggressive anger to absolute, deer-in-the-headlights shock. They didn't know that I knew about the gold chain. They thought they had kept his lavish spending a complete secret from me. "You're being incredibly selfish," my father yelled, recovering quickly. He pointed a shaking, accusing finger right at my face. "After everything we gave you, after we raised you, you gave me nothing," I roared back. The sheer volume of my own voice surprised even me. It echoed terrifyingly in the small elevator. You took my time, you took my money, and you took my peace of mind for 5 years. And you fully planned to keep taking it until the day you died, leaving everything you own to a lazy parasite. Now get out of my elevator before I call the police." My father glared at me, his chest heaving with exertion. He realized physical intimidation wasn't going to work. "If you do this," he threatened in a low, vicious, ugly tone, "we will tell everyone. We will post it all over Facebook. We will call your boss. We will absolutely ruin your professional reputation. Everyone in this city will know what a terrible, ungrateful son you are." I stared right into his desperate, angry eyes. I didn't blink. "Do it," I whispered coldly. I reached right past his shoulder and slammed my fist into the lobby button. He stepped back in shock, and the doors finally closed, leaving them standing out there in the lobby. The secret family war was officially out in the open. The explosive fallout from the lobby confrontation did not stay neatly confined to my personal life. It bled directly and aggressively into my professional world. I was working as a senior financial analyst at a top-tier investment firm, and the daily pressure at work was already at an absolute boiling point. Our regional director was retiring at the end of the quarter, and a massive, career-defining promotion was up for grabs. Winning this position came with a massive base salary increase, an executive title, and serious corporate power within the industry. After 3 rounds of cuts, the final decision was down to exactly 2 people: me and another senior analyst named Marcus. Marcus was the definition of cutthroat. He was a shark bleeding in his own water. He was currently going through a catastrophic, highly publicized divorce and fighting a brutal, incredibly nasty custody battle over his 2 young kids. His lawyer fees were draining his bank accounts dry faster than he could fill them, which made him desperate, sleep-deprived, and incredibly aggressive for this promotion. He was the kind of guy who would throw his own grandmother under a speeding bus just to get ahead. He was constantly hovering around my desk, trying to subtly undermine my financial reports, and blatantly attempting to take credit for my predictive models during board meetings. I needed absolute, laser-sharp focus to beat him, but my family was clearly determined to destroy my career. Just 3 days after the ugly incident in the apartment lobby, the front desk receptionist at my office, a sweet, older woman named Brenda, pinged my desk phone. When I answered, she sounded incredibly uncomfortable and nervous. "Elijah," she said softly, keeping her voice low, "your mother is calling the main corporate line again. She is angrily demanding to speak to your department manager or human resources. She keeps shouting that it is a life-or-death family emergency." My blood ran ice cold. My father's vicious threat in the elevator to ruin my professional reputation wasn't a bluff. They were actually executing it. I slammed my laptop shut and sprinted down the hallway toward the front desk. Sarah saw me running, recognized the panic on my face, and immediately followed me out. When I finally reached Brenda's desk, Marcus was standing suspiciously nearby. He was pretending to review some printed files, but he was clearly leaning in, listening to Brenda's side of the conversation. He had a smug, predatory smile spreading across his face. He smelled blood in the water. He knew I was dealing with a massive personal crisis, and he was absolutely ready to use it against me to win the promotion. I grabbed the heavy receiver from Brenda and forcefully transferred the call to a private, secure line. I practically ran into an empty, unlit office and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. My mother was completely hysterical on the other end of the line. She was screaming into the phone that the bank had officially sent a pre-foreclosure warning letter via certified mail. She threatened that if I did not wire the money in the next 10 minutes, she was going to call Mr. Sibling, our strict CEO, and tell him that his top candidate was financially abusing and abandoning his elderly parents. "Mom, stop right now," I said, my voice shaking uncontrollably with suppressed fury. "If you ever call my office line again, if you ever speak to my boss, I will immediately hire a lawyer and file a permanent restraining order against you. I am not kidding. Do not test me." She slammed the phone down, hanging up on me. I sat alone in the dark office, resting my head in my hands, feeling the corporate walls physically closing in around me. The stress was absolutely suffocating. When I finally unlocked the door and walked out, Sarah was standing guard. She had successfully intercepted Marcus, distracting him with a fake client crisis and sending him on a wild goose chase to the IT department so he couldn't snoop. Sarah grabbed both of my shoulders firmly. "Do not let those people break you," she said fiercely. "You are better than this chaos. Focus on the numbers. Win the promotion. Take your financial power back." I nodded, locking my family trauma inside a mental vault. I had a corporate war to win. I took Sarah's advice to heart and threw my entire soul into the job with a manic, obsessive intensity. I practically lived at the office. I worked late into the night, drinking endless cups of black coffee, meticulously refining our regional portfolio strategies, analyzing complex market trends, and building an absolutely flawless, bulletproof presentation for the executive board. Every single time my personal cell phone buzzed on the desk with an unknown caller ID, my heart would jump into my throat. I lived in constant terror that it was my parents creating a massive public scene in the lobby, or my mother finally calling Mr. Sibling. But I violently pushed through the fear. I weaponized my anger. I channeled every single ounce of betrayal and hurt from reading that inheritance document directly into my work ethic. The day of the final board review arrived. The atmosphere in the massive glass conference room was thick with tension. Marcus went first. His presentation was highly aggressive and visually flashy, full of buzzwords and bold claims. But beneath the surface, it was fundamentally flawed in its long-term risk assessment. You could clearly tell his mind was distracted by his ongoing divorce proceedings. His predictive numbers were sloppy, and his answers to the board's questions were defensive. Then it was my turn. I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked to the front of the room to face Mr. Sibling and the entire board of directors. I delivered the absolute best presentation of my entire life. I knew every number, every projection, every possible market variable. I was sharp, authoritative, and completely impenetrable. When I finally clicked to the last slide and finished speaking, Mr. Sibling, a notoriously tough man who rarely ever smiled, gave me a slow, deep, incredibly approving nod. 2 days later, late on a Friday afternoon, Mr. Sibling secretary called me into his expansive, mahogany-paneled corner office. He stood up, walked over to a crystal decanter, and poured us both a glass of incredibly expensive scotch. He handed me the glass, looked me in the eye, and told me that my absolute dedication, my flawless analytical skills, and my grace under pressure were exactly what the firm needed in upper leadership. He formally offered me the promotion. I was officially the new regional director of asset management. The salary and bonus package he slid across the desk was astronomical, far beyond anything I had ever imagined earning. I shook his hand firmly, feeling a massive surge of pure, unadulterated triumph wash away months of anxiety. I had done it. I had secured my future, and I had done it entirely on my own merits. On Monday morning, I sat in my brand new, spacious corner office overlooking the sprawling city skyline. I booted up my terminal to begin reviewing the massive regional portfolio I was now directly in charge of managing. A specific, highly flagged digital file immediately caught my eye. Mr. Sterling had briefly mentioned during our meeting that the firm had recently purchased a massive bundle of distressed local debt from a smaller, failing regional bank. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy for the upcoming quarter. My first major job as director was to meticulously oversee the financial restructuring or the immediate foreclosure of these toxic assets. I clicked open the digital file and brought up the spreadsheet. I slowly scrolled through the long list of residential properties that were slated for immediate, aggressive review. Suddenly, my finger froze on the mouse scroll wheel. The specific street address glowing brightly back at me from the high-resolution screen was a neat, suburban house with a white picket fence. It was my parents' house. The massive investment firm that I now helped run had purchased my parents' severely defaulted mortgage debt. They were officially, legally, my firm's clients. The dark shadows of my painful past and the bright, powerful light of my new corporate reality had just collided violently. I leaned back slowly in my expensive leather chair, a slow, cold realization washing over my entire body. The universe had an incredibly dark, poetic sense of humor. While I was settling into my massive new corner office, the situation at my parents' house was rapidly deteriorating into absolute chaos. The money tap had been completely shut off. The first of the month came and went, and then the 15th, and the bank accounts remained completely dry. Carter, my 28-year-old brother who had never known the meaning of financial struggle, was suddenly facing a harsh reality. He had personal bills. He had a massive cell phone bill, streaming subscriptions, and worst of all, he owed money to people you do not want to owe money to. I found out the details of what happened next much later, through an incredibly angry phone call from Uncle Dave, but it played out exactly like a bad movie. Carter was panicking. He didn't have my salary to leech off anymore. He couldn't ask my parents for cash because they were currently drowning in past due notices and foreclosure warnings. So, Carter did what parasites always do when their host dries up. He found a new way to feed. He called Jason. Jason was the smooth-talking guy with the flashy clothes who had sold Carter that expensive gold chain in the driveway weeks earlier. Jason wasn't just a guy who sold jewelry. He was a guy who knew how to turn physical items into quick, untraceable cash. One Tuesday afternoon, when my parents were out at a stressful meeting with a bankruptcy lawyer trying to figure out how to save their suburban kingdom, Jason pulled his car into their driveway. He backed it right up to the garage door. Carter let him inside. Together, they went through my parents' house like absolute vultures. They didn't take everything, just the things they thought my parents wouldn't notice immediately. They took my father's expensive, vintage golf clubs from the back of the garage. They took a box of my mother's silver flatware that she only brought out for Thanksgiving. They even went into the home office and took the heavy, expensive all-in-one scanner and printer, the exact same machine I had used to uncover the inheritance document that started this entire war. Jason packed it all into the trunk of his car, handed Carter a thin stack of $20 bills, taking a massive cut for himself, and drove away. Carter used the cash to pay off his immediate debts and buy video games, genuinely thinking he had solved his problems. Of course, the illusion didn't last. 3 days later, my father went into the garage to get his golf clubs for a weekend round he couldn't afford to play anyway. The explosion that followed shook the entire house. My mother practically tore the place apart looking for her silver. They confronted Carter in the kitchen. They backed him into a corner, screaming, demanding to know if someone had broken in. Carter broke down instantly. He didn't have an ounce of backbone. He started crying, but he didn't take the blame. He looked at my parents, tears streaming down his face, and he pointed the finger directly at me. He screamed that he was starving. He screamed that his phone was going to be shut off and his life was going to be ruined. And then he said the magic words that perfectly manipulated my parents' twisted logic. He said, "If Elijah hadn't abandoned us, if Elijah had just paid his share of the bills like a good son, I wouldn't have been forced to do this just to survive." He pushed me to this. And the sickest part of the entire story? My parents actually bought it. They didn't kick Carter out. They didn't call the police on Jason. My mother hugged Carter, rubbed his back, and told him they understood. They fully redirected all their anger, all their shame, and all their fear right back onto me. In their minds, I wasn't just the son who stopped paying the mortgage. I was the monster who forced my poor, vulnerable brother into a life of petty theft. 2 weeks after the theft incident, the reality of the foreclosure finally hit my parents. The bank wasn't playing games anymore. The final notices had been delivered. Their only remaining option was to go down to the massive corporate investment firm that had recently purchased their distressed debt and physically beg for a high-risk refinancing plan. They needed a miracle, and they needed to grovel for it. It was a Tuesday morning. I was standing in the soaring, glass-walled lobby of my firm's downtown headquarters. The floors were polished white marble. The security desks were brushed steel. The entire building hummed with wealth, power, and consequence. I was wearing a brand-new, tailored charcoal suit. I held a sleek digital tablet in my hand, reviewing the morning portfolio numbers while waiting for Mr. Sterling to come down from the executive suite so we could walk to a board meeting together. The heavy, revolving glass doors spun, and my parents walked into the lobby. I spotted them instantly. They looked completely out of place in this towering temple of corporate finance. My father was wearing an old, ill-fitting navy suit he hadn't updated since the late 90s. The lapels were too wide, and he looked incredibly uncomfortable. My mother was wearing her absolute best cashmere sweater and carrying her one designer handbag, trying desperately to project an aura of wealthy suburban stability that no longer existed. Carter, amazingly, had dragged himself out of bed to accompany them. He was wearing dark jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, looking like a teenager dragged to a principal's office. They walked up to the grand reception desk, looking incredibly intimidated. I stood about 30 feet away, perfectly still, watching them. I didn't hide. I just waited. My father finished speaking to the receptionist. He turned around to survey the lobby, and his eyes locked directly onto mine. He froze. He tapped my mother on the shoulder and pointed. She turned, saw me standing there, and her posture immediately changed. The intimidation melted away, replaced instantly by arrogant, misplaced confidence. They thought they had the upper hand. They marched straight across the marble floor toward me, Carter trailing lazily behind them. "Well, well, well," my father said, stopping a few feet away. He looked me up and down, taking in the expensive suit, but his brain refused to process what it actually meant. He crossed his arms over his chest. "Look who it is. Let me guess. You finally got fired for your terrible attitude, and now you're working the front desk here." My mother let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Or maybe he's here begging for a loan, Robert. Maybe his fancy lifestyle finally caught up to him. Look at him holding that tablet like he runs the place." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at them with absolute, chilling calm. "I am not here for a loan, Dad, and I don't work the front desk." Carter scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes. "Dude, stop trying to flex. We know you're just a glorified accountant. Why are you even in this building? We have a very important meeting with the regional director to save our house, so get out of our way." They were so incredibly blind. They were standing in the heart of my empire, and they still thought I was the dirt beneath their shoes. I gripped the edges of my tablet. My heart was beating a slow, powerful rhythm against my ribs. "You have a meeting with the regional director of asset management?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Regarding the defaulted mortgage on the property out in the suburbs?" My father narrowed his eyes. "How do you know about that?" "Yes, we do. And when we explain our situation, they are going to restructure our loan. So step aside, Elijah. We have important business to handle." "You really think they are going to restructure a toxic asset for a family with zero liquid cash, drained savings, and an unemployed 28-year-old dependent?" I asked quietly. My mother's face turned bright red. "Don't you dare speak about your brother that way. The director will understand our family situation. They have programs for people like us. People who have been financially abused by their own selfish children." I nodded slowly. I let the silence stretch out for 3 long seconds. I wanted them to remember this exact moment for the rest of their natural lives. Right at that moment, the private executive elevator chimed loudly behind me. The heavy brushed steel doors slid open, and Mr. Sterling stepped out into the lobby. He was wearing an impeccably tailored navy pinstripe suit, projecting absolute authority. He saw me standing there and walked briskly over, carrying a leather portfolio. My parents immediately recognized him as someone important. My father straightened his posture, trying to look respectable. My mother put on her best, fakest polite smile. "Elijah," Mr. Sterling said smoothly, stepping up right beside me. "Are we ready for the quarterly review meeting?" Before I could answer, my father stepped forward, extending his hand aggressively toward Mr. Sterling. "Excuse me, sir. My name is Robert. This is my wife, Margaret. We have a 10 o'clock appointment to see the new Regional Director of Asset Management regarding a mortgage restructuring. Could you point us toward his office?" Mr. Sterling stopped. He looked at my father's extended hand, but he didn't take it. He looked at my mother, then at Carter, and finally he looked at me. A look of complete, utter confusion crossed his sharp features. "I'm sorry, Robert, was it?" Mr. Sterling said, his voice polite but incredibly cold. He turned his body slightly, gesturing directly to me with an open palm. "I don't need to point you to his office. The regional director is standing right in front of you. Elijah was just promoted to the position last Friday. He handles all distressed residential assets for the entire eastern seaboard." The silence that fell over the lobby was absolute. It was profound. You could have heard a single pin drop on the marble floor. My father's extended hand slowly dropped to his side. The color completely, totally drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick ghost. His jaw physically went slack. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. She took a stumbling step backward, one hand flying up to cover her mouth. Her designer bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor with a heavy thud. Carter just froze. He looked at Mr. Sterling, then at me, and his brain completely short-circuited. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by the panicked realization of a trapped animal. I looked down at the sleek digital tablet in my hand. I tapped the screen once, bringing up their specific case file. I didn't look up at them. I kept my eyes focused firmly on the data. "I have reviewed your application for a mortgage restructuring," I said, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet space. It wasn't the voice of a son. It was the voice of a corporate executive holding the executioner's axe. "Your debt-to-income ratio is entirely unsustainable. Your emergency funds are non-existent. Without a verified, high six-figure salary backing this loan, you are a guaranteed default risk. As the regional director of this firm, I am bound by strict corporate policy." I finally looked up. I looked right into my father's terrified eyes. "Your application for refinancing is officially denied," I said coldly. "The foreclosure process will proceed immediately. You have 30 days to vacate the property. Have a good morning." I turned my back on them. I walked away, falling into step beside Mr. Sterling. I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't need to. I could feel their absolute devastation radiating through the lobby. I heard my mother start to sob loudly, a high-pitched, desperate sound of total defeat. I heard my father completely lose his breath. I walked into the executive elevator. The doors slid shut, and I felt a weight I had been carrying for 32 years completely vanish from my shoulders. If I thought the lobby confrontation was the absolute end of the war, I was severely underestimating my parents' capacity for toxic retaliation. When desperate people are backed into a corner, they don't surrender gracefully. They lash out blindly, hoping to drag everyone else down into the mud with them. 2 days after I formally denied their loan application at the firm, my phone started vibrating wildly on my desk. It wasn't my parents calling. It was a flood of notifications from Facebook. I rarely used the platform, mostly just keeping it active to stay in touch with a few college friends and extended family members out of state. But suddenly, my phone was exploding with tags, direct messages, and angry comments. I logged in and my stomach immediately tightened. My mother had gone nuclear. She had posted a massive, multi-paragraph essay on her public timeline, tagging me, Aunt Clara, Uncle Dave, and at least 50 other family members and family friends. The post was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She didn't mention the foreclosure. She didn't mention the inheritance document. She certainly didn't mention Carter stealing her silver. Instead, she painted a picture of absolute tragedy. She wrote about how she and my father had sacrificed everything to raise me. She wrote about how I had become obsessed with corporate greed, completely consumed by money and power. She claimed that in their twilight years, when they were struggling with health issues and a tough economy, their wealthy, successful eldest son had brutally and heartlessly abandoned them to starve on the streets. The comments section was an absolute dumpster fire. People I hadn't spoken to in a decade were aggressively attacking my character. Distant cousins were calling me a sociopath. Family friends were writing long paragraphs about how ashamed they were to know me. Aunt Clara, true to her two-faced nature, commented a string of crying emojis and wrote, "Praying for Elijah's cold heart to soften. Family is everything." I sat at my desk, reading the toxic comments, and I felt that old, familiar urge to shrink away. I felt the urge to delete my account, hide in the shadows, and let them control the narrative just to avoid a public confrontation. But then I remembered the feeling of standing in that lobby, holding that tablet and claiming my own power. I remembered Sarah telling me not to let them break me. I didn't shrink away. I went to war. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. It contained 5 full years of meticulous bank statements. Every single $3,500 mortgage transfer. Every electric bill. Every property tax payment. Every emergency fund wire transfer. I took clear, high-resolution photographs of every single page. Then I pulled out the trump card. The photograph I had snapped of the inheritance document on my father's desk, explicitly leaving everything to Carter and specifically cutting me out because I was a financial success. I created a new public post. I didn't write a long, emotional essay defending myself. I kept it brutally factual and entirely devastating. I wrote, "For 5 years, I sacrificed my own life, living in a rundown apartment and driving a broken car, to secretly pay the massive mortgage on my parents' house. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep a roof over their heads. Last month, I discovered a legally binding document where they secretly left that exact house, and every penny they own, to my unemployed 28-year-old brother, specifically stating I was cut out because I made too much salary at my job. They expected me to pay for a house I would never own, to fund a brother who refuses to work. I stopped paying. Now the bank is foreclosing. I am not abandoning my family. I am simply resigning from my forced position as their personal ATM. The receipts are below." I attached the photos of the bank transfers. I attached the photo of the inheritance document. I tagged my mother. I tagged my father. I tagged Carter. And then, I tagged Aunt Clara, adding a special note. "Aunt Clara, since family is everything, I'm sure you will be stepping up to pay their mortgage this month, just like you promised Uncle Dave you wouldn't." I hit post. I turned off my notifications. I closed my laptop. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The fallout from my social media post was immediate, explosive, and entirely satisfying. I didn't have to defend myself in the comments section because the evidence spoke for itself. The very same distant cousins and family friends who had been attacking me an hour earlier suddenly went completely silent. Several people deleted their angry comments. A few even sent me private messages apologizing profusely, admitting they had no idea I had been funding my parents' entire lifestyle. But the best reaction came from Uncle Dave. He jumped into the comments section directly under Aunt Clara's crying emojis. He publicly exposed her, writing, "Clara, stop the fake crying. You literally told Margaret you wouldn't give them a dime of our money and bragged about tricking Elijah into paying it. You are just as bad as they are." The humiliation was absolute. Aunt Clara deleted her entire Facebook account less than 20 minutes later. That evening, as I was sitting in my living room enjoying a quiet dinner, my cell phone rang. It wasn't a text or an angry Facebook message. It was a direct phone call from my father. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part of me knew that if I wanted absolute closure, I needed to finish this conversation on my own terms. I picked up the phone and pressed accept. "Hello," I said, my voice completely flat. My father was breathing heavily on the other end. He sounded broken. He didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded like a man who had finally realized he was standing at the bottom of a very deep hole he had dug himself. In the background, I could hear my mother sobbing loudly, the kind of deep, hysterical crying that comes from genuine panic. "Elijah," my father said, his voice cracking. "Elijah, please, you have to take that post down. Everyone is calling us. Your mother's friends are turning their backs on her. The people at the country club saw it. We are entirely ruined." "You ruined yourselves?" I replied calmly. "I just turned on the lights." "Please," my father begged, dropping his pride completely. "We will fix this. I swear to you, Elijah. We will call the lawyer tomorrow morning. We will completely tear up that inheritance document. We will rewrite it. We will give you 50% of everything. We will give you the whole house. Just please call your firm. Stop the foreclosure. Give us a loan. You have the power to stop this." I listened to him beg. I listened to the man who had called me selfish, the man who had threatened to destroy my career, crying over the phone for a bailout. A year ago, hearing him cry would have broken my heart. Now it just made me incredibly tired. "Dad?" I said slowly, making sure he heard every single syllable. "You still don't get it, do you? You think this is a negotiation. You think you can buy me back with the promise of a broken house and a rewritten will." "I don't understand," he stammered. "We are giving you what you want." "No, you aren't," I said. "I never wanted your money, Dad. I didn't want the house. I made my own salary. I built my own life. All I ever wanted was a family that respected me. I wanted parents who loved me as much as they loved Carter. I wanted you to see my value as a son, not as a bank account. And you failed. You failed completely." "Elijah, we love you," my mother screamed from the background. "You love my wallet," I interrupted, my voice hardening into steel. "You only want me now because the bank is taking your house and everyone knows what you did. You don't want a son. You want a bailout. And I am fresh out of cash." "Please," my father shouted, desperate. "You are our blood." "Blood just means we are related," I said quietly. "It doesn't make us family. Do not ever call this number again. Do not contact my office. If you come to my building, I will have you arrested for trespassing. This is the end, Dad. Goodbye." I didn't wait for him to reply. I pulled the phone away from my ear and hit the red end call button. I went into my phone settings and permanently blocked both of their numbers. I blocked Carter. I blocked the house landline. I set my phone down on the coffee table. I walked over to the window, looked out at the city lights glowing in the dark, and took a massive, incredibly deep breath. The air tasted clean. The war was over. I had won my freedom. Time is a strange thing. When you are trapped in a toxic cycle, the days feel incredibly long, dragging on forever under the heavy weight of obligation and anxiety. But when you finally cut the dead weight loose, when you finally step out of the shadows and into the sunlight, time accelerates. It heals, it builds, and it moves forward. A full year passed since I hung up that phone and blocked my family out of my life permanently. That year was the most productive, peaceful, and transformative period of my entire existence. Without the crushing $3,500 monthly anchor dragging down my bank account, my financial situation exploded. The massive salary and bonus structure from my new position as regional director actually stayed in my own possession. I didn't waste it on flashy cars or expensive jewelry. I used my expertise. I took my savings and purchased a beautiful modern duplex in a rapidly developing neighborhood. I lived in the top unit, which had floor-to-ceiling windows and a massive balcony, and I rented out the bottom unit, creating a steady stream of passive income. I finally fixed the dent in my car, bought a whole new professional wardrobe, and even took a 2-week vacation to Italy, something I had dreamed about doing since college but could never afford. More importantly than the money, my mental health stabilized. I wasn't waking up at 3 a.m. with a racing heart, terrified of an emergency text message from my parents. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been the background noise of my entire adult life was completely gone. I surrounded myself with people who actually valued me. Sarah, my brilliant coworker who had pushed me to stand up for myself, became one of my closest friends outside of the office. We spent our weekends hosting barbecues on my new balcony, talking about the market, laughing loudly, and enjoying life. I built a chosen family, a network of friends and colleagues who respected my boundaries, celebrated my successes, and never once treated me like a transactional resource. I was finally truly happy. But even though I had moved on, the universe has a funny way of making sure karma eventually balances the scales. I never actively sought out information about my parents. I didn't stalk their social media, and I didn't ask around. But the news found me anyway. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon in late autumn. I was sitting on my balcony, drinking a premium cup of coffee and reading a financial journal, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Uncle Dave. I hadn't spoken to him since the massive Facebook blowout a year ago, mostly because I wanted to keep a clean break from the entire family tree. But Dave had been the only one to warn me about Aunt Clara's manipulation, so I owed him a little respect. I answered the call. "Elijah," Dave said. He sounded tired, older than I remembered. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all, Uncle Dave," I said, setting my journal down. "It's good to hear your voice. How are you doing?" "I'm surviving," he chuckled dryly. "Listen, I know you cut contact with your parents, and I completely respect that. I really do. You did the right thing. But I felt like you deserved to know how the dust settled. You deserved to know the end of the story." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city skyline. I didn't feel a spike of anxiety. I just felt a mild, detached curiosity. "Okay, tell me." Dave took a deep breath. "They lost the house, Elijah. They fought it for a few months, tried to declare bankruptcy, but without your income backing them up, the bank showed no mercy. A real estate agent named Chloe handled the foreclosure auction. They were officially evicted 6 months ago." I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my coffee. I figured as much. What about Carter? Did the golden boy finally step up and get a job to save them? Dave let out a bitter, ugly laugh. "Carter? No. Carter did exactly what you predicted he would do. When the eviction notice came, your dad managed to scrape together about $5,000 by selling the last of his decent tools and his old truck. He put the cash in a safe in the bedroom to use for a security deposit on a cheap rental apartment." Dave paused, letting the silence hang heavy on the line. "Carter found the key to the safe. He packed a duffel bag, stole every single dollar of that emergency cash, and vanished in the middle of the night. He completely abandoned them. He wouldn't answer his phone. They haven't heard a single word from him in 8 months. The boy they gave everything to, the boy they wrote that inheritance for, robbed them blind and ran away the second things got hard." A cold, hard sense of vindication settled in my chest. It wasn't joy. It was just the absolute confirmation that I had been right all along. They had nurtured a parasite, and they were shocked when it finally fed on them. "Where are they now?" I asked quietly. "They had nothing left," Dave said softly. "They are renting a tiny, run-down one-bedroom apartment on the far east side of town. The divorce rumors are flying, but they can't afford a lawyer to actually split up. Your dad is working the night shift as a security guard at a warehouse. He's 68 years old, walking a concrete perimeter in the freezing cold. And your mom, she took a job working the cash register at that discount supermarket chain out by the highway. They are completely broke, Elijah. They are exhausted, and they are completely alone." I thanked Uncle Dave for the update. We chatted for a few more minutes before hanging up. I sat on my balcony for a long time, watching the sun slowly set over the city. I thought I would feel a massive rush of triumph. I thought I would want to celebrate their downfall. But I didn't. I just felt a profound sense of pity. They had traded a son who would have moved mountains for them, all for a lazy thief who left them with absolutely nothing. They made their bed and now they had to sleep in it. I thought the phone call with Uncle Dave would be the absolute final chapter of my connection to them. But life loves a dramatic coincidence. A month later, the holidays were approaching. My firm was sponsoring a massive charity food drive for a local shelter. I volunteered to handle the logistics. I needed to buy bulk non-perishable items, hundreds of cans of soup, massive bags of rice, boxes of pasta. To maximize the charity budget, I rented an SUV and drove out to the massive discount supermarket on the east side of town, the one Uncle Dave had mentioned. I honestly didn't think about my mother working there. It was a huge chain, and the chances of running into her seemed incredibly slim. I filled 2 entire shopping carts with heavy bulk items. I pushed them toward the front of the store, looking for an open checkout lane. The store was crowded. The fluorescent lights were buzzing loudly overhead, and the smell of cheap floor wax filled the air. I found a lane with a short line and pushed my carts forward. I was looking at my phone, checking an email from Sarah, waiting for the customer in front of me to finish paying. The customer grabbed their bags and walked away. I pushed my cart up to the conveyor belt and finally looked up at the cashier. It was her. My mother was standing behind the register. She was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting blue polyester vest over a faded shirt. Her hair, which used to be perfectly styled at expensive salons every 2 weeks, was pulled back into a messy, frantic bun. The heavy, designer makeup was gone, revealing the deep, dark bags under her eyes and the new, harsh lines of stress carved into her face. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a single 12-month period. She looked exhausted. She looked completely defeated. She reached out to grab a massive can of soup from the belt. As she pulled it toward the scanner, she glanced up to look at the customer. Her eyes met mine. The heavy can of soup slipped right out of her trembling hand. It hit the metal scanner tray with a loud, violent crash, denting the aluminum side. We stared at each other across the cheap plastic barrier. The silence between us was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. I saw 100 different emotions flash across her tired face in the span of 3 seconds. I saw shock. I saw profound, overwhelming shame. I saw the desperate, pathetic hope that maybe I would say something. Maybe I would reach out. Maybe I would save her from this miserable reality she had created for herself. She opened her mouth, her lips trembling. "Elijah!" she whispered. It was a broken, fragile sound. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had watched me sacrifice my youth, my money, and my peace of mind for 5 years, only to secretly sign it all away to a brother who eventually robbed her blind. I looked at the blue vest. I looked at the dented can of soup. I didn't feel anger anymore. The burning rage that had fueled me for a year was completely gone. But I also didn't feel love. I didn't feel the urge to rescue her. I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional well was completely, permanently dry. I didn't say a single word. I didn't smile and I didn't frown. I simply reached out, grabbed the handle of my heavy shopping cart, pulled it backward, and calmly turned away. I walked over to the self-checkout lane 3 aisles down. I scanned my own items. I paid with my own credit card. I packed my own bags. As I walked out the sliding glass doors and stepped into the bright, freezing winter sunlight, I took a deep breath. I loaded the groceries into my SUV, started the engine, and drove back toward the city, back toward my real life. I never looked back again. If there is one thing I have learned from this entire, exhausting ordeal, it is a truth that society desperately tries to hide from us. We are constantly fed this incredibly toxic narrative from the moment we are born. We are told that blood is thicker than water. We are told that family is absolutely everything. We are told that no matter how terribly they treat you, no matter how much they take from you, you have a permanent, unbreakable obligation to tolerate their abuse simply because you share the same DNA. I am here to tell you with absolute certainty that that is a lie. Blood does not automatically make someone your family. Blood just makes you biological relatives. True family is built on mutual respect. It is built on shared sacrifice. It is a two-way street where you support each other, lift each other up, and protect each other. If you find yourself in a dynamic where you are constantly the one giving your time, your money, your salary, your emotional energy, and they are constantly taking without a shred of gratitude, that is not a family. That is a hostage situation. You do not owe your life to people who only view you as a resource. You do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep people warm who wouldn't even blow out a match for you. Walking away from my parents was the hardest, most agonizing decision I have ever made. But it was also the most important. It saved my sanity. It saved my future. It allowed me to build a life where I am respected, where my hard work benefits my own goals, and where I am surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not for what I can pay for. It takes an incredible amount of strength to break a cycle of manipulation. It is terrifying to step out into the unknown and leave everything you thought you knew behind. But I promise you, the peace you find on the other side of that heavy door is worth every single tear. You deserve to be the main character in your own life, not an ATM for someone else's. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long one, and I know it was heavy, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, giving everything to people who never appreciated it? How did you finally break free? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Before you go, I have a special request. If you are still here, listening to my voice at the very end of this video, you are part of an exclusive group. You are what I call the 1% Club. I want you to go down into the comments right now and type the letter W. Just the letter W, which stands for winner. This is our secret code. It lets me know that you are one of the amazing people who stuck with me through the darkest parts of the story all the way to the bright side. You are the real winners. Please don't forget to hit that like button and follow the channel so we can continue this journey together. I have so many more stories to share with you. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.